bring people in since we are literally on a lunchtime kind of a time crunch. So we're going to officially get started, and let me do so by officially giving you a hearty jumbo and a welcome to our first in what will be a monthly series of what we refer to as the Ngoma Conversations. Ngoma, of course, one of the translations for Ngoma means drums. We are excited and delighted to be here. And we are Widener University African and African American Studies minor. And we invited a lot of people to come to our launch, and a whole lot of people are here today. Of course, we say hello to all of the Widener family, but we also sent out emails across the country to other African and African American studies, Black studies programs as well. And we have quite a few people who are joining us from all over different walks of life, but all interested in the topic. So again, we invite you. We are excited and here to have you. And again, on behalf of myself and the other co-coordinator, which is Dr. Jen Padilla Wyse, we invite you to what will be a monthly series on the third Monday of each month on Zoom. Zoom affords us the opportunity to be able to do this without you having to get in your car, on a bus, and you'll be able to come and see a series of varied monthly topics that address themes, realities, cultures, past, present, and future in what we would call the greater Africanist community. And we have a whole lot of great people lined up. But before we get to that, in the introduction of our speaker for today, we just want to we can't thank everybody just due to the lack of time that we have, but we want to give some special thanks to the Dean of Arts and Sciences, which is David Lehman, his support of this project, and for particularly the underwriting, which makes us able to do this, which we're excited about. And also, what I would say part of the brain trust for this is Nicole Rayfield, Assistant Dean, College of Arts and Sciences, again, who without her support and effort, we wouldn't have been able to pull this off. And we are absolutely excited about that. And then there are many others. We just don't have time to thank all the many others. There are many others, but thank you. And then hopefully over the next couple months, we will get to acknowledge you by name. Over the next couple months, next month we have lined up a filmmaker, documentary filmmaker, and the founder of realblack.com, which addresses filmmaking in the African American community. And he hosts the website realblack.com on YouTube, which hosts over 1 million. It has an audience of 1 million. We're looking forward to having him. He is trained in filmmaking and will have a lot to say about African American experiences in film. In December, we have lined up already a fantastic historian who is a interpretive fellow at the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia. And he, from walking tours to history of enslavement to bringing characters to life, his name is Michael Idris, and he will be joining us in December, and that again would be the third Monday of the month. And so look forward to that. We do have, by virtue of the fact that you signed up today, you are on our emailing list, so you will get more information about that and signing up. And of course, we hope that you'd like to stay on. I know I get a lot of emails too, but hopefully you'll want to stay on the list. But if for some reason you want to be taken off the list, just let us know. So we have in this common period at Widener, we have a little less than an hour, and we're going to go on and get started. We're excited about the launching of this venture and the fact that all of you are here. The person that I wanted to do this is a sister warrior friend. Some years ago when I did a weekly radio show, I used to have her on just to enlighten and to turn up our audience. She is none other than Dr. Tonya Thames Taylor. She is the Associate Professor of History and she's the founding director of the African American Studies program at Westchester University. She is a member of the executive committee of the Frederick Douglass Institute, and maybe someday in the future you will hear her talk about, not today, but you will hear her talk about how she and a cadre of people brought that Frederick Douglass statue to life at Westchester University, one of the last places on earth that he spoke before he made transition. And she was a part of that team of making that happen. And just that conversation by itself is phenomenal. Her research focuses on gender, race, human rights, and Southern histories. She's received numerous fellowships and grants. She is a National Endowment for the Humanities Summer Institute Fellow. She has numerous awards and accolades behind her name. Of course, she is the native of the coastal town of Gulfport, Mississippi. She's a magna cum laude graduate of Tougaloo College, a historically black university in Tougaloo, Mississippi, earning her Master's of Arts in History and a PhD in American History from the University of Mississippi, affectionately known as Ole Miss in Oxford. And she has life memberships in alumni associations. Again, she is a native daughter of Mississippi, and we could go on and on. Look for her on a TED Talk. She does a phenomenal TED Talk that you will see if you look her up, entitled Admiring the Future. We are honored and excited to have her in this launch. We ask if you could hold on to your questions and comments and stay muted. We will have some moments for questions, which we will ask you then to do in the chat. It is my honor and pleasure to bring her forward for her talk today, and we are really excited. Tonya, thank you so much in advance.
Yay, I'm happy to be here. I am so happy to be here. You all, it is now 12:11. So that gives us just a few minutes to go at it, right? And I'm so glad because I only have like 10 slides, but it's a lot in these 10 slides, okay? All right, and I'm gonna be going back and forth because I want to show you real time, right? Primary evidence, what I do in my class. But I'm going to start off with this right here, right? It's like, I want to sort of greet you in this way. And this way is going really using the song that was made popular after the American Civil War. And this is what the theme, a part of my theme is today. And it really sort of represents my approach, right? Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. Tanya's about to trouble some water. All right, so I'm about to trouble this water, right? And we're going to get to this United Daughters of the Confederacy and who they are. Again, I was deciding to go, I was going to create like a sort of list of slides, but I decided to go this way because I'm going to go back and forth a little bit. So let me share my screen right quick, right? And this is about, I have a lot of pieces here, and I could go to the plan of the show, but what happens is that this is called Operating Partial Freedom, understanding how the United Daughters of the Confederacy shaped the American narrative in Black resistance. Before I get started, I would like to give my own shout outs, and that's to Dr. Richard Cooper for inviting me, the Widener community, and faculty, staff, students, and administrators, fellow friends, as in Quakers, who are supporting me to here today, current and former students, fellow activists in groups like the Haiti Historical Association. I belong to several boards, and I'm going to give them shouts because I see some of the members here of the Friends Publishing Corporation, the Friends Historical Association, and the Kenneth Underground Railroad Center. I see some of my sorority sisters from Gamma Phi Delta. I see some of my colleagues, all right, from Westchester University. You all rock, and I am so, so happy that you're here. My Tougaloo and Ole Miss family. And of course, I see some of my cousins on the line, y'all cousins, right? And my friends who are joining us from that central time zone. I'm forever indebted to my family. And I also see my husband who is listening from work. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to sort of, I want to sort of, share with you this a narrative, if you will. So I grew up in this beautiful coastal town of Gulfport, Mississippi. Now, when people think about Mississippi, you know what they think about, right? They think about cotton, they think about blues and catfish. I come from a different part of Mississippi, and the Mississippi that I come from, right? Okay, and also you have you think about the Bible Belt, right? So you think of Protestant religion. The part of Mississippi that I come from is the part is known as the coast. I grew up 80 miles east of New Orleans. Okay, so the area that I'm influenced by, right? I grew up sort of with French culture, with Catholic sort of religion, right? The influence of Catholic religion. I grew up with gumbo and shrimp, okay? And I grew up with water, you know what I'm saying? So, but the one piece that sort of this element about Gulfport, Mississippi, this beautiful, it's the second largest city in Mississippi. I mean, and the second largest city behind the capital city of Jackson. It is the most progressive areas. We have military, 2 military bases. And, so again, we have this different influence, right? So when you think about Mississippi and you think of like shows like In the Heat of the Night, those type of shows where, you got this traditional Mississippi, right? Okay, so my Mississippi is, again, different from that. But one of the things that we have in common, I don't care where you go throughout Mississippi, and this is pretty much like the South, and this is what I want you to think about as I'm moving forward. The one thing that most of these areas, I don't care if you go into those areas that made up the Confederacy, you're going to basically run into a Confederate memorial. Now, the conversation that they're using today that makes it, sort of sound a little softer is that they use the term monument, right? They said, oh, these monuments. Well, I didn't grow up with monuments. I grew up with the word Confederate memorial. Now, when you think about a memorial, you think about memorial service, right? When you go into like a memorial service for an individual. And now what happens is that you're supposed to have a reverence, supposed to have a respect. So that's part of level. So the entire time that I was coming up, when we in front of our courthouse, right, there was a Confederate memorial. Now think about when I first went to register to vote, I had to pass by a Confederate memorial. When I went to go and apply for a license for get a tag for my car, I had to go past a Confederate memorial. When I even applied for a marriage license, I had to go past a Confederate memorial. I just want you to understand that the Confederate memorials are normally, right, in a place where there are prominence. They can be in a park. They can be in the center of town. They're normally a place in front of a courthouse where all the business happens. Now, before I even got to the understanding of knowing what a Confederate memorial was, right? I knew, it was, I had to take it back to when I was younger, right? There was a show in the 1970s. A show was called The Dukes of Hazzard. And in the Dukes of Hazzard, I mean, it was a hot show. After this, Google it. It was like one of the top rating shows in the 1970s. Now, what happens is when you get on the show, and we're gonna listen to a snippet of this song, and I want you to listen to the lyrics because they're gonna say, and I know the lyrics by heart. Just a good old boys, never meaning no harm, right? And so, right, been in trouble with the law since the day they were born. You know what I'm saying? And so what happens is I want you to sort of think about, as you're sort of looking at this thing, this again, a song that was sung by Waylon Jennings. And so here we are in the 1970s. I am the first generation of people who grew up in an integrated Mississippi. So I didn't go to segregated schools. I didn't have that history, right? And so what happens is that in this particular television show in the 1970s on a Friday night, right? You go in and so we were all glued to the Dukes of Hazzard. Now, the one thing about the Dukes of Hazzard is that they drove a car, and the car was called the General Lee. So you like, oh, the General Lee. Now, on top of the General Lee, there was a Confederate flag, right? And boy, when that horn blew, it played. It played Dixie. And you watched the show because you wanted to hear that blowing of the horn. Right? And so what happens is that they had, it even got into, when I got older, the song was so the show was so popular, even among Black folks, right? Is that even guys did several things. They even had a rap song that one of the Dukes, Bo and Luke Duke, they had a cousin named Daisy, and she wore these real short pants. There even was a rap song that says, "Look at those girls, those Daisy Dukes on," right? I mean, it was inundated in the culture. Right. And so what happens is that, so everywhere you sort of go, you sort of thought about that. You rooted for Lou and Bo Duke to go against this character who's sort of Yankee-ish by the name of Boss Hogg, right? And so I just want to sort of get you and sit you in the theme of a Friday night, right? Watching television. Now, I want to say something to you, another piece, is that I know of Black guys who literally change, right? Who literally change their horns in their car to reflect. All right. And I also want to show you that when my cousin, for his for one of the Christmas gifts that he got, he wanted the General Lee. And my auntie then bought it for him, okay? Because again, the show was so popular, right? And it created like a cult following. And so I want you just to I want you to listen to the words of the song, right? Again, just the good old boys, never meaning no harm. And so what you sort of see is that here's a show that pays reverence to something called the lost cause. Now, before, when you go into this lost cause perspective, what you had was that, before we go to the song, I want you to understand that I, again, came of age in this, seeing this Confederate statue in the most progressive part of Mississippi, right? But I also watched it in films. Like when I was younger on Saturday morning, they had one of the cutest little girls. Her name was Shirley Temple, and she was in a picture called The Rebel, right? And The Rebel was, again, this idea of celebrating this concept, right? That the South was romantic. It was a place to be. People were happy. Life was simple, right? And so let's just look at just a little bit of the Dukes of Hazzard, and so you can hear sort of the theme song of the Dukes of Hazzard. Okay. They go to General Lee.
Just a good old boy, never meaning no harm. Beats all you never saw, been in trouble with the law since the day they was born. Straightening the curves, flattening the hills. Someday the mountain might get them, but the law never will. Making their way the only way they know how. That's just a little bit more than the law will allow. Just a good old boy, wouldn't change if they could. Fighting the system like a true modern day Robin Hood.
All right, and so yes, and then you also got this whole idea of the rebel yell, right? And so here you are having these people, right? These young folks being inundated in this Confederate lost cause culture. You got it? Now, you're saying, now what does that have to do with her conversation for today? See, it was a group called the United Daughters of the Confederacy. And the United Daughters of the Confederacy, they were formed in Nashville in 1894. And their goal was to really look at the American South, right? And to create a new narrative. So one of the themes I want you to take away from this is the North won the American Civil War militarily. But who writes the narrative? And in this case, the United Daughters of the Confederacy, they wrote the story of the South. They wrote the story of the Civil War. And they shaped how the way that you can perceive the American South. So in essence, they actually, won the war culturally. So let me say that again. The South loses the war militarily, but socially, the South is going to really shape how we see folks. The idea, what we're reckoning with and reconciling with today is pretty much the narrative that the United Daughters of the Confederacy set up. So let me sort of give you a meaning of what I mean by that. And I'm gonna actually, go over, I'm gonna jump on my slides a bit. So let me do that right quick. All right. Again, I'm trying to do some real time here. All right, so let me give you an example of what I mean about winning the war socially. And so here in this particular image, I hope you can see it. I'm now trying to circle with my mouse this particular piece, right? You have this Black mammy. She's here, the Confederates, they're getting ready to go off to war. And this image here, mammy, she has a child that's, at her, at her hip, right? She's, the baby is sort of going away. And so this one character of Mammy would manifest in movies like Gone with the Wind, where there's a romanticism with, Get the South, right, as Hallie McDaniel. Again, what you also see is that Mammy, one of the first real talkies that we have in American history is, and it's called the Jazz Singer. And one of the songs that they sung was "Man, Me," right? This idea of, Mammy, right? This loyal Black person who just loved the level of the Confederacy. So some of the key aspects that I'll be talking about today, and I'm going to show you in a second, is, who they really targeted. And so we have someone by the name of Dylan Roof. I'm going to show you a picture of him in a second, some Confederate statues, how they memorialized, how they added insult to injury, which is really a very sinister piece about creating a narrative, because the United Daughters of the Confederacy have given and promoted a narrative that will have historians looking at primary documents and still trying to argue the contrary. So let me say that again. And in a second, I'm gonna get to the tenets of the what they actually promoted, these ideas that they promoted. And I'm gonna show you documents, but you will still have folks who are looking at primary documents and will say, no, that's not true. Okay. And so then we talk about what they sort of worked for. They really weren't working for telling a history of the past. What they were really shaping was how a future generation would look at the Civil War and slavery, the Civil War, and the Reconstruction period. So again, here are some people who shaped a narrative. Now, again, how we shaped an American narrative, I'll get to in just a few seconds. And so what happens is that also you have the glorification. If you ever go to Atlanta, I was going to show you a slide of Stone Mountain. If you Google it, where you have these, 3 Confederate, generals that's etched in stone, while the rest of the nation have Mount Rushmore, which is problematic, right? Because we know that's on indigenous people territory. But for the most part, when you go to Stone Mountain, right, it was Stone Mountain is the answer to Mount Rushmore, the Confederate answer to Mount Rushmore, right? All right, so what happens is that I want to sort of, emphasize this guy named Dylan Roof. And you can see that he's burning the flag here, and he promotes the Confederate flag. So that this idea of going back to Lou and Bo Duke, when, as you heard in the lyrics, they operate outside of the law. Because in essence, the law doesn't really capture the spirit, right? So the law is just a set of guidelines, but it's not something that follows. The rebel goes outside of that, hence the Confederate and rebel flag. All right, so Dylan Roof was a person who walked into, went to a church. Now think about all these deliberate actions. He goes into a church, he prays with a group of people, and he murders 9 people. And what he was trying to do was to start a race war. Now, in August of 2017, what you have is that a similar group that's called the Unite the Right. What happens is you can see in these images here, you had young people with tiki torches saying that the Jews would not replace us. They were angry because they were upset that the Robert E. Lee, there's a proposal to take down a Confederate statue that the daughters of the United Daughters of the Confederacy put up. Right. And so what happens is that they wanted to take that statue down. So these people came from all across the country. They united. They basically had a riot. And one of the young people who were involved basically went back into his car. He left the riot. He went in his car. He cranked it up. See, these are all deliberate actions. He cranked up his car. His muscle car, he basically put his foot on the gas and he drove through a crowd and he killed an individual. So when I tell you that the United Daughters of the Confederacy, their goal was to do exactly to influence a generation, the generations after the American Civil War, about what the war was about. So if you read Dylann Roof's manifesto, which you can find online, he basically goes back and he really tells you exactly what the United Daughters of the Confederacy want a person to believe. And basically he talks about what is true history and what is real history. In a second, I'm going to get to that. So what are the tenets of these women here, which is the United Daughters of the Confederacy? They were, again, an elite group of people. Their main influence was from 1894 when they were found in Nashville, Tennessee. And their influence went into World War I. Now, I'm going to go back to that Arlington statue in just a second, but I want to tell you what their tenets were. So the tenets of the lost cause narrative, the lost cause is, again, this idea of memorializing the South, this idea that, the South would, in many ways, have been, they were valiant, they were heroic, right? That the people who sort of fought in the American Civil War against the Union, they had a heroism to them that is worthy of celebration. Remember, I grew up with the terms memorial. So there's a reverence that you're supposed to have for their heroism. They actually had this idea, and they promoted this idea, that enslaved people were happy. They were happy being slaves. In fact, many of them were disappointed. And they even wrote, stories about how you have people that's, speaking in this exaggerated dialect that says, boy, I long for those days. Oh, Lord, let there be slavery in heaven. I can't make this stuff up, but that's what they were writing in books, right? And so also they said that slavery was not the root, slavery was not the root cause of the American Civil War, not slavery. That slavery was not the root cause of the Civil War. Now, you saying, Thames Taylor, now I need for you to really bring that home to me. Well, one of the things that there's a document, I want to go back to when they said that the Civil War was not about slavery. So if you go and you Google even the Confederate States of America, right? And you go and you just look at the Confederate States of America, what you'll end up finding is that if you look at particularly Mississippi, South Carolina, they're very clear at telling you what this war was about. So in this document, which I hope that you can see, and I will try to zoom it up a little bit, just in case. So there's no, confusion about this. It's very clear what they said. Our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interest in the world. Now, this is, this is a project that's at the AAfAm project at Yale, and you can go and look at, or you Google the Mississippi secession papers, right? It is very clear that they're saying, hey, look, they're letting people that come in, they're now trying to, take away our safeguard. They're now trying to tell us, they're trying to, even in some of the cases, it seeks not to elevate or support the slave, but to destroy his condition, because it was their understanding that Black people who were slaves lived better than free Blacks who lived in the North. Now, That is where their position is. But you have the United Daughters of the Confederacy was so successful that they'll have trained, historians, right? With, believing that, wait, now we have to look at this idea of, really, was it about slavery? Now, I'm going to give you in a second another piece here, but I want you to sort of look at how they say that, they were talking about the Union. It advocates Negro equality socially and politically, right? And so they were saying, look, we don't want anything to do with this place, right? About, how and this place, this North, and the ideas that they had. Now, that's not up for debate. They tell you. But you will have people who are looking at documents and say, but the cause of the American Civil War was not slavery. Well, if you look at the primary documents, it was. And that's no dispute. But it's the narrative that they end up creating that end up shaping and changing how we sort of look. So in this, how we sort of look at situations, right? Again, so one of the documents that they used was called, and I want you to see this, Miss Mildred Lewis Rutherford, right? She had this they had this document, they call it a measuring rod to test textbooks and reference books in schools, colleges, and libraries. Okay, all right. And if you want to contact me, please do, and I'll send you links to all of these documents. And so one of the things that I want you to sort of see, and I only have just a few more minutes I see, is that I want you to sort of look at what they proposed here. So again, they were now talking about the true history. And what they're saying is that, first of all, they said that this was a Southern historian, Miss Mildred Rutherford. And she says that they want to make sure that the story of the South is correctly taught in schools. They wanted to be correctly taught in schools. And then what they wanted to see is that they said that they wanted a true presentation of the facts of Confederate history, and that they believe that, it is her suggestion as to having these facts imparted to the youth. Remember, the United Daughters of the Confederacy were not about talking about the past. What they did was that they formed in 1894 because many of these Confederates veterans were dying. And so what they wanted to do was to create a narrative, right, about the war. And they wanted to gather, as many of these stories to venerate these people, these Confederate Confederate veterans. Now, I do want to step back just one quick second. So you do have an historian, his name is Edward Bullard. And what he did was, Pollard. And what he did as immediately after the Civil War, not even within a year, they started to promote this idea of the lost cause. They started to write it in history books. But it's going to be the United Daughters of the Confederacy that not only dot the landscape, the iconography, what you can see, what you can walk past, right? But they're also going to go into those textbooks that's for the young, right? One of the things that they have here, and I want to show you, they even created a human flag. These are little children. And if you can read it, they had over 600 in 1907. They had 600 school children form a Confederate flag in Richmond at a reunion of the Confederate veterans. So these are all young folks. So they were going after young folks, the ideas of shaping how a world would be. Now, while this is very important, because when you learn a certain history and you learn that the American Civil War was not about slavery, and that slavery was not bad at all. Now you're seeing these same people are going to be the folks that you're going to meet that's going to be doing what? They're going to be participating in lynchings. They're going to be participating in, segregation and Jim Crow. They're going to be the ones that also train another generation that when you look at civil rights pictures, they're going to be the ones yelling. Okay, so now you have, again, a generational story that's been told. But let's just look at this document here. And they said that we accept her suggestion as to having facts imparted to our young, so they may learn correctly the rights and the history of the great struggle for which we offered our lives and gave everything save our sacred honor. when you sort of go into, here are some for people, as you can see, the people that are on this committee, that they are parts of the Confederates. They were Confederates themselves, right? And one of the things about the measuring rod that I want you to sort of see here is that, and while many people would know and treat this story the way that it was, I want you to look at the index. They say that secession was not about a rebellion. They talked about the slaves were not ill-treated in the South, and that the North was largely responsible for their presence in the South, right? And so they go on and they talk about what people could do with these textbooks. So the first thing that they said is that, they sort of laid it out and said, hey, look, one of the things that, we want to make it be sure is that you have to reject the book that calls a Confederate soldier a traitor or a rebel, in the war a rebellion. You have to reject the book that the South fought to hold on to her slaves. You have to reject the book that speaks of a slave holder of the South as cruel and unjust to his slaves. You have to reject the book that just glorifies Abraham Lincoln and vilifies Jefferson Davis. You have to refuse to adopt any textbook or any set of books that basically give compromises and mistreats the South. You have to just right out reject it. So, right, what you see here in the very documents of these documents, this measuring rod will go throughout, and they would sort of treat this piece about slavery. They would treat it as, again, it was not something that was, an awful institution. So when we are now looking at how people see the South, and let me give you a grand example of what happened when it's, again, reinforced. I just told you about looking at it in something like the Dukes of Hazzard, Gone with the Wind. And before these types of pieces, now this is in popular culture. And so there was a film that was called The Birth of a Nation. Here's a real example. So a film called The Birth of a Nation. They used they made a character off of a real historical figure by the name of Thaddeus Stevens. But the way that they depicted Thaddeus Stevens is that he was some Yankee who was misguided and he didn't understand Negroes, right? And so when I asked my students, who many of them are from Pennsylvania, and I asked them, do you know Thaddeus Stevens? The answer is no, they don't even know him. So again, and Thaddeus Stevens helped to save public education in Pennsylvania, by the way. You can Google that for yourself. And so what happens is that when you now looking at how powerful they were, they went into the textbooks, they went into the curriculum. And so therefore they informed the whole generations, because I want to take you now to their website. So again, because of who they are, they have a website. You go to the United Daughters of the Confederacy. You can go to their website. They still have the Children of the Confederacy. They tell you about the projects that they have, okay? They even tell you about the catechisms. Now in their catechisms, what they would do is they say that Lincoln was a problem, and that, the South, again, was not about the slavery. And they give scholarships, right? They tell you who they are. Let's go here right quick. It's gonna pop up in a second. Okay. Hopefully. Okay, so they tell you what the purpose of it is. They tell you that every month, right? They meet to talk about historical programs. They tell you that they are, we seek to honor and perpetuate the memory and the deeds and the men and the women of the Confederacy. They tell you to observe all Confederate Memorial Days. Now, again, remember, I told you, I grew up with the word memorial, not monument, because again, they still using that reverence. You're supposed to, praise, these folks who fought in this war. And then another piece that they do, and I just want to tell you, they have scholarships they still give, right? And these scholarships are, again, for people who have sort of mastered, right, the history of these Confederates. They tell you about their chapters and divisions, and they, tell you that, what's going on. And as you can see, they got divisions throughout the South, right? And they again go to this catechism. And again, this catechism, which you can still find if you sort of look at the catechisms of the United Daughters of the Confederacy, they're there. And so I want you to sort of take away from today's talk that you've been influenced by the Daughters of the Confederacy, what you've learned about the American Civil War, what you've learned about slavery, but you learned about like the institutions, about, how, the nation that we live in, right? The perceptions of groups. The United Daughters of the Confederacy are not a group that's out front. They don't talk to the media. They do a lot of things behind the scene. They erected from 700 to 800 statues throughout this nation. Now, you may say, now, Thames Taylor, I thought that you were supposed to talk about Black agency, and I am. So I told you, I showed you that story, that statue of what's in Arlington. Now, let me just tell you how powerful the Daughters of the Confederacy was. They put a Confederate memorial in Arlington Cemetery. Now, you may not understand what Arlington Cemetery is, so let me sort of break it down to you right quick. Arlington Cemetery is a cemetery that there was a cemetery, they had during the American Civil War, they sort of ran out of space. So Arlington Cemetery was once owned by Robert E. Lee's wife, okay? And so what happens is they seized the house, the Union Army did at the very beginning of the war. And so they seized the house, and then they took the house under their possession. And so they end up turning it into a cemetery. In the cemetery, if you go to Arlington National Cemetery, that's where the unknown soldier tomb is and everything, right? And so what happens is if you go there, it tells you that the Arlington Cemetery is there to honor those who serve this nation, with, valor and honor. Now, do you understand that they said serve this nation? The United Daughters of the Confederacy are so tough that they got a statue dedicated to people who went against the United States military, and a cemetery that honors the Union dead. Now, let me just bring it home to you to let you know how even more influential they were. They were able to get a monument, a memorial in the Arlington Cemetery before Arlington Cemetery. And we know that there is the group called the United States Colored Troops who fought in the American Civil War, but initially Arlington was segregated. And so the Daughters of the Confederacy was able to get a memorial in Arlington Cemetery before Arlington Cemetery integrated in 1948. Now you're saying, okay, Thames Taylor, but tell us about Black agency. How did the United Daughters of the Confederacy, we know that they shaped curriculum, we know that they shaped the perception of America, but how is this related to Black agency? Because Black people fought them the whole time. So what happens is, first of all, let me tell you something. You can't find Mammy really in history. Yeah, you mean all those big Aunt Jemima and all of them, with the happy Black person smiling with the kerchief on her head and the bandana, that kind of stuff. You can't find her in history because you know why? And Black people, when the narrative came out, they said, look, like people like Harriet Tubman, if you read her autobiography, write her biography, the people who actually kept a lot of the white children were actually young kids, not a old mammy, like you see in something like Gone with the Wind, number one. Number two, what happens is that we almost got a statue dedicated to Mammy in DC off of Massachusetts Avenue. Literally, we couldn't pass a lynching bill. Now remember, UDC, the United Daughters of the Confederacy, are operating during the highlight of lynching. And so what happens is we couldn't get this nation could not pass an anti-lynching bill in the Senate. The Senate would apologize for that in 2005. We couldn't get an anti-lynching bill, but the Senate approved of a statue being constructed for Mammy in DC. The only thing that stopped it was Black people went straight crazy, like Mary Church Terrell. They were like, "What? First of all, you're not telling the truth about the history, and second of all, who knows? A lightning may strike it and it may come down, and all that other stuff." And so, basically, can I tell you something? The House, when it went back to the House didn't pass it and they went out of session. And so the approval is actually still there in the Senate records. It just session went out and we didn't get the Mammy statue. And it was because of those agencies. So when you're looking at, right, how Mammy worked in history, how the United Daughters of the Confederacy worked in history, what they did was that they created this entire different narrative. And they made it now where we now have debates in America about the cause of slavery, of the American Civil War. We have the debates about if people should be equal and how they should be equal and how should they be treated. And so therefore, I'm going to end with this by saying this. Remember that town I told you that I love so much, my beloved Gulfport, Mississippi. Now, I have a little humor here. You know that I am actually a Confederate rebel too, because I went to Ole Miss. And the mascot for Ole Miss is the Colonel, Reb. So I'm a Confederate Reb. Now, again, that place wasn't created for me, okay? That's why they got a mascot that's a Confederate rebel. But we made it, we eked out a space in there. Now, going back to my hometown, do you know last year, after George Floyd, after all the rallies, do you know that my hometown, that Confederate that I told you I went past, can I tell you that they had a chance and opportunity to remove it? And well, it was a 2-2 vote. And because it was a tie, that Confederate is still there looking over the courthouse in Gulfport, Mississippi in 2020.
And that's where I'm going to jump in. That is the perfect place to pause you. And first of all, it's very clear to me that we gave you an impossible task to take a 3-hour lecture in 25 to 30 minutes. And I see applause. Yeah, let me unmute applause. You nailed it. You beautifully nailed it.
Thank you.
Beautifully nailed it, from song to the present, and the consistency of what we're seeing today. You brought it home in a very tight presentation. We have a couple minutes for questions in the chat. And then, of course, Tonya, give your contact information, because you're going to get a million email that should come to you and not to me. Give your contact information, if you would.
Okay.
Yep, she's putting it in the chat, it looks like. Yep, and let me just see if there's any, yep, fantastic, exceptional.
Yay.
Fantastic presentation, Soror, got to put that in there. Wonderful. And then there were a couple people that were sending me notes, direct notes during the presentation. This is fascinating. Great presentation. Messages are now filled. Let's see if I can. Great presentation. Great. How can I get in your class? Learn so much. We get to hear more next month. Different speaker next month. You gotta figure out how you can get Tonya on the circuit.
I know we only got a few minutes, you all, and I just want to say something to you. And I do want to share this cartoon. I want you to go and look at this guy. His name is Thomas Nass, and he called "This is a White Man's Government," and this is about Reconstruction. And what happens is you are here, right here in the center. Anytime you see a character like this, this is the Irish. This is how they were depicted until they become white in the 1930s, right? And it's a book called How the Irish Became White. This is Capitol. That's who that Boss Hogg character was named after, and this is the North. Here at the center, you have this guy. This is Nathan Bedford Forrest. That's what the NPF stands for at the top of his head. And again, we only got a few more minutes because I know that people have to dip because the class is, the time period is over. But I want to just tell you here. So here, Nathan Bedford Forrest, he has the dagger in his hand, the lost cause. Now, I want you to notice in the back, you have the colored orphan asylum that's being burned to the ground. You have lynching, and you have a colored school. And again, he has, the dagger in his hand, the lost cause. And he also is standing with the United States, the Confederate States of America. And so right now, all of them united, although these are three different white men that can have three different interests, all of them would unite to basically hit at the United States soldier. This is a soldier in the United States colored troops. And And he has a flag in his hand, and this is peace. Now, why is this important? It's because what happens is what the United Daughters of the Confederacy was able to also effectively do is that they were able to also get and take the Black contribution to the American Civil War and the Union success. They were able to write that out of history. And it became a brothers' war. And in that brothers' war, again, Black contribution was then obfuscated, on the record. And so now, why is that important? Remember, I told you that you had Black folks in the South, just like me, and we used to all sit there and have reverence for something like the lost cause indirectly, because it came to us through popular culture. And what happens is that, unfortunately, we were, again, just like the general American, participating in narratives that we really didn't have an understanding of. So when you hear that Dukes of Hazzard song, when they saying that they, the law never, the mountains may get them, but the law never will. Well, in many ways, we still reckoning with that today. And now it's time. I see it's 55 after. And if anyone has questions, please send them to me. Again, we're going to respect your time. And thank you so much for being here today. Thank you.
I want to thank all of you for attending. What a cool way to use Zoom for people who have an interest in the topic anywhere, all over the country. And thank those of you, of course, at Widener, those of you that we sent out emails to and other programs, African American Studies, Africana Studies across the country. Thank you so much. Look forward to the third Monday for another presentation. None better than Dr. Tonya Thames Taylor. Quite personally, she could have done all 10 of them, but we're going to have a different one next week. Thank you so much, Tonya. Amazing as usual. Thank you. And you can unmute for your applause or anything else you want to do.
Thank you all. Take care. And Mike, the best next week, in the next few weeks, Mike was there. That's next week, Mike. When you come up.
Next month. Yeah, next month. But thank you. And we appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Take